This is Dennis Raimondi with the Coffee League, found at thecoffeeleague.com. Back on the show for part two of our interview is Sal Bonavita, former owner of Pete's Coffee, entrepreneur, businessman, and a real pioneer in the area of specialty coffee in the United States. One of the people that brought it in, along with his Alfred Pete, who I think Sal considers his mentor. So to continue the story, Sal, welcome back on the show.
Thanks, Dennis. Nice to be with you again.
So when we last left off, you had just purchased Pete's, and I believe Pete's. Tell our listeners a little bit. Pete's was in Berkeley at the time. Is that right? And what was their operation like when you bought it?
Well, the operation was Alfred, and one of the things on the final agreement, this was more of a financial issue, but it worked out to be more of a working issue, is that in my buying out of Pete's, he wanted, I didn't have all the cash to pay for the company, so he had to carry some of the financing, which he liked. And he wanted to be paid as a consultant for 5 years.
Mm-hmm.
So that was all agreeable to me. I mean, that will have consequences, so I just wanted to show you where it came from. But anyway, so for me, I would say, Dennis, I got questions, and I still get questions about Pete's. It's like, how did he manage to influence so many people and how they appreciated coffee? What did he do? How did he do it? I mean, that question was is always asked, and to this day, I still get questions like that. And I could only say that Alfred was an eccentric and complicated man. Alfred's aim was for perfection, which was much more important to him than making money. So right from the get-go, I felt like I was in a Japanese Zen kind of thing with Alfred.
Right.
The notion that, the notion that you only do that which you can do perfectly, or whatever you do, you try to do it perfectly. So your best is good enough for me, but not for Alfred. Alfred wanted the best, period. And that's how he was as a mentor.
Now, do you think, Sal, did that make it difficult to work with him in a business relationship? And even after you bought the business, how was he involved, and what was your relationship like with him at that time?
Every day.
Mm-hmm.
Every day. So just to give you a context of that, every day you would be roasting coffee to sell retail, or you would get samples of coffee to taste. So every day there was an opportunity to taste. And it took Alfred about, I would say, 2 months to get it to where I was in the warehouse every day cupping with him. And that had a lot of what his style was. I mean, Alfred came from a Dutch family of coffee people. His father, his uncles, they were all in the coffee business. And, he would always come to work dressed in a tie and a brown lab coat. One would think you were in a laboratory,
Right.
He'd be walking around in a very European way, and he had a very European way about him. He was charming as well as difficult. So I would say, like, to give you an example, when I first bought the store, the first day that I owned the store, I could barely get into the front door. There were so many people waiting to get into the store, and a lot of them had their own coffee cups with them. So, I had to push my way up and, knock on the front door to get in. And that was, once I got started with Alfred, it was very nice in the first couple of months. Every nice being, we took walks just about every day and talked about it. But anytime there was something to taste, I don't care where we were. If we went to a restaurant, it would be taste this, taste that. So it wasn't just coffee and tea, which of course there was always tasting coffee and tea. But in those first couple of months, it was very pleasant. And it was just on a tasting binge, we taste wine, we taste, jams. It didn't matter to him. If he was with me and there was something to taste, even a flower perhaps. Mm-hmm. So both of us sailed, and he had a boat in Berkeley. So, we were very tight. Everything was how I had hoped it to be. That I was really getting some of this European style of operating and treating coffee, much more mature than anything in the United States.
No, so let me ask you here, was there any place you could go to get comparable coffee in the San Francisco area to Pete's or anywhere for that matter? Or was it really unique?
Oh, no, it was unique. And I mean, and that to me would be a question, and I'll get to it in a minute if you'd like, but what was it? What was it that he did to the coffee or managed to influence so many people and have so many people trying to come and see what his magic was so they could operate their businesses? These people in the coffee world. And I give you an example of how dramatic he could be. So one day we were tasting tea, and it's a process of cupping. You have to weigh out each different tea differently, and there's about 11 or 12 teas you're going to taste. And you have to boil the water, pour it over the tea, cover it, let it steep for a while, smell it. And then after you smell it, you then take a sip of it. So now this is after almost 3 months. Mm-hmm. So Alfred and I have been tasting for at least 3 months. So in the middle of this, he goes to taste the first cup now. All the smelling part is over, and he tastes the first cup. He throws his hands up in the air and says, "The man does not even know how to boil water." That would give you some idea of how Alfred would go. I mean, now it's not like this was my first day. I mean, I did this for months, and he tasted it, and everything was fine. But the point for me was, and this is how I took it, was that everything counts, even the water. Is the chlorine in it? Is the pipes rusty? Is if you boil water too long, some of the oxygen gets passed off, and it's not so vital. It doesn't have the freshness that boiling water, as soon as it comes up to a boil, when you see like an eyelid in the water, then it's perfect. So you pour it over the tea leaves at that time. Any other time, there's something that Alfred would pick up. Some little thing. So anyway, that was the degree to which he was trying to get me into every little aspect of tasting. So anyway, that was just one example. As I said, and then there was another one where we were roasting, and all of a sudden there was a rattling in the roaster, and it wasn't operating correctly. And to Alfred, this was wonderful. "Sal, you need to take that machine apart and fix what's wrong with it." Now, I hadn't been that kind of a mechanical person before I met Alfred.
Right.
Usually there was a guy to call about stuff like that. But not with Alfred. Alfred felt and believed that if you're in the coffee business, you have to know everything about that coffee.
Mm-hmm.
So to him, it was great. You know, I had to take the machine apart, put it back together again, and that he felt was, I never saw him so happy with what he was teaching me, is for him to see me go through that exercise. So that was how serious he was about learning the business. It wasn't like, you know, read a book and worry about the sales number. The sales number never even, hardly ever came up. It was all these other attributes of this perfection that he had in his way of operating.
Right, and during almost the whole time you were at Pete's, you owned Pete's, Sal was there as a consultant and buyer. Is that right? Till 1983.
Yeah, he was just basically. It started out as just a financial title that he wanted, was to be the to take a certain portion of the money as a consultant, but we never really talked about what that was. You know, I just thought it was a way of him saving money on taxes or something like that, and that I would spend, maybe a month. I mean, this is the difference about how I thought business were and how Alfred thought business were. I thought, okay, I'm running I want to open up more stores. I want to get involved more with distribution of the coffee, and Alfred was more about deeper, get better at it,
He was almost like an artist then. Okay, so he's with you until you sold the business, as I understand it, to Jerry Baldwin, who was one of the Starbucks founders in 1984. What happened with Pete at that point? Was he still with you? And after you sold it, what went on with him?
Oh, well, that so it's a interesting story is that Alfred did not want to sell the business to me. Alfred did not want to sell the business to Baldwin. Initially, Jerry was close with Alfred for a period of time when they opened up their first Starbucks in Seattle, and Pete's was actually selling them roasted coffee until a time when it got too much trouble for Alfred. So he said, you should go get a roasting. And he was willing to help them along the way. But he didn't, what he said to me, he never thought they were really coffee people. They were more business people.
Right.
He even had a big distinction.
This is Jerry Baldwin, the Starbucks founder, is who he's talking about, right?
Yeah, and yeah, of course that wasn't fair. But as far as Alfred was concerned, he didn't call up Jerry because Jerry had asked him if he was ever going to sell a company, please call him. And I knew Jerry very well from Coffee Imports. He was a customer, etc. And when I decided that I was going to sell a company, there was many large coffee companies that were interested in buying the company, and I felt that Jerry would be the best person, and I still believe he was the best person to take Pete's to the next level, and he would try to keep the essence of Pete's going, because that's what he was fascinated with as well. How come? What was the magic there that he had such a appreciation for his coffee that nobody else had? And it was so different than anybody else's coffee. So after he was really upset. I mean, he couldn't. I tried to work out something with him, because even though there was nothing written that he was supposed to show up at the roasting plant every day, he'd be there before me every day.
Wow.
And then we'd start off right away with tasting whatever it was we were going to taste. And he set up a situation that I had to actually roast the coffee beans, put on the overalls and roast the coffee beans for several months. That was I don't know if that's That was a story where I told you those first couple of months, everything was just wonderful. You know, I felt like I had a mentor. I had never had anybody with his depth of knowledge of a particular industry and was able to relate it to me and show me what it looked like. But he could not believe that a man could, he was totally against opening up a lot of stores. He thought you couldn't do both. Really have excellent coffee and tea and keep opening up stores. Something would affect the quality of the coffee. And so I had somebody, my brother-in-law at the time, in the store managing Pete's, so to speak. And after the summer, in the wintertime, in February, there's a major show in Milan that I went to. And that was for coffee imports. And when I came back, I found out, he told me, that he had bought $300,000 worth of coffee. So I said to Alfred, Alfred, this is no longer your business. I don't have $300,000. You know I don't have it. What did you do? And the next, and I was really angry with him and told him he wasn't to do anything. He wasn't to hire, fire, or buy, do anything unless I knew about it and approved of it first. He said, well, this is the way I've always bought coffee. When the coffee is right, I buy it. I buy enough for the entire year. So that's one important lesson, the consistency of the coffee. So anyway, he had his point. So I was really angry. And the next day, he came back to me and he said, listen, I have somebody that will lend you the money. I think it was his own money, actually.
Right.
He said, but there's just one thing. He said, you have to come and roast coffee for at least 1 month, just in the morning. You can come there in the morning and then you can go back to the store or do whatever you do. But every morning you come in and you roast coffee so you know what's involved with it, not that somebody else is doing it and you're always at the mercy of that person. Instead of keeping the standards up, you're in their standards. So anyway, reluctantly, but I agreed to do that. And that's when he was happy.
Right.
So every morning I would, meanwhile at 3:00 in the afternoon, I had a car come and get me to take me to San Francisco to coffee import. So that was bugging him a lot.
Mm-hmm.
So that was really the training period for me.
What was that like, Sal, going in? Had you done roasting before, and did you feel
Never.
you learned a tremendous amount? Was it an enjoyable experience for you?
It turned out to be. It turned out to be very good, actually, because there was there was all this anger, and for me, I came from a business where it was selling. How much sales did you do today?
Right.
Like Mark Freeman. How much did you sell today?
Right. Right.
Doing that was the mentality of the business. And here it was totally different with Alfred.
It was like a businessman dealing with an artist. That
exactly.
Yeah.
That was the conversion.
Right.
That was the conversion. So I did that every day, and it became sweet, actually, Dennis. It was interesting because Alfred had so much status in the coffee world that, people treated him like a god, so to speak. And he knew that I had a lot of things going. And when you cup coffee, as I mentioned to you before, there's many steps. It takes you about an hour just to set the table up properly. So I would be roasting in the morning, and then he'd take all the coffees and set them up, and that would be when I would take lunch, and then I'd come back, and we'd taste all of the coffees that I roasted that day and critique each and every one of them, plus any other samples that might have come in to be tasted. And he would not only put it all together after we tasted, he would clean up and wash the dishes and do all of that.
Wow. Yeah,
And then,
real
yeah,
Dutch. And now let me ask you, what did he enjoy drinking? What was his coffee consumption like at the time, and what was yours? And did he drink his coffee black? Did he have how did he prepare it? What worked for him best?
uh, well, the truth of the matter is, Alfred had many jobs prior to coming to San Francisco. I mean, like working for the Dutch East India Company, working for Lipton's Tea, and on and on and on. There was a lot of companies that he worked for in the coffee and tea trade in Europe and in New Zealand. So I think he was a better cupper of tea than coffee, not skill-wise, preference-wise. He would always say to me, not always, he said to me a couple of times that coffee, if you took the two extremes, let's say a Sumatra and a Kenya, or you looked at a pie as a taste metric, and you put the two coffees, Sumatra and Kenya, on it, it would take up about a quarter of the circle. If you put up the different teas that were available, greens, and how many blacks and oolongs, the variety and the amount of difference between teas is much bigger.
More
than
complex.
There is. Yeah, there's more to it than just coffee.
Was Alfred Pete a coffee drinker? Did he drink coffee?
Yeah, he drank coffee, but his best moments were drinking tea. I mean, when we would be cupping tea, for example, and things have changed a lot in the business, but in those days, we would get a sample of a tea from the auctions in India, let's say of a Darjeeling. So you get the samples every week because the crop is changing every week, and you pick out which coffee you like, and then you focus on that coffee and try to on that tea, and try to buy it at its peak. And those were the most enjoyable times for him and I, were those moments. As a matter of fact, on one occasion, there was somebody in the cupping room when Alfred and I were tasting tea, and they said, if I wasn't in the room, I would think you two were talking about a woman. So,
You really, yeah. Now,
yeah.
in the time remaining that we have, Sal, because we got about 7 or 8 minutes left. Tell us about now that you're moving on, and what you sold to Jerry Baldwin, who was a Starbucks founder, and then where did it go from there?
Well, he was upset, and it took almost a year and a half, 2 years maybe, before he accepted that was a decision I felt I had to make, was to sell it, and I sold it to who I thought would be the best one to carry on the tradition of Pete's. I mean, one of the things that I think is most people, when they start a coffee business, they really don't know how to roast coffee. They're not, no idea. So to get the true flavor out of their coffee. So the key to Alfred's taste, what was it about Pete's coffee that once you got hooked on that, you'd never be satisfied? It was all in the roasting process. Like beans swell up. When you preheat the roaster and then you drop the coffee beans in, the beans swell up and there's a pop. Suddenly, the moment that the humidity inside the bean is exposed with some force, usually 10 minutes after you drop the coffee in. And it's almost ready to be taken out. A lot of roasters probably at that point, there's less shrinkage and it's a light roast. And that's where most of the canned people, majors, were taking out the coffee and retailing it. Then there is a second pop, not as loud as the first, when the oils in the beans will start to come out on the surface. Now, this is when the roaster has to be very careful. There is a risk of burning or fire, in which case the coffee would be undrinkable. It would taste like coal or burnt coffee. And this is where Alfred was a master. This is really where, I mean, just thinking about those days with him is
right.
Brings back a lot of memories. Anyway, so he was the kind of the master of this. He went beyond the second pop without losing the characteristics of the coffee. In his dark roast, he found the balance of the acidity, the body, and got full flavor out of it. He taught and helped dozens of entrepreneurs and business guys in their business, because that's the question everybody always asks. When do you take the coffee beans out of the roaster?
So let me ask Sal. He went for a darker roast, but he didn't over roast it. The characteristics of the bean were still there. What was the magic that allowed him to do that?
So when anybody would ask Alfred, how do I know when to take the beans out? Because once they get oily now, you know, and you're inside a flaming roaster, it sometimes it catches fire. You know, the oils on the coffee beans. So many people had a very hard time with trying to get that right. And you know, Alfred, when you asked him that question, he'd say, the coffee will tell you when it's ready to come out.
Wow.
So, so that's an answer that you can't really put to practice unless you, you know, trying to, what do you do? Pay attention to this. After that second pop, you only have minutes before it could, you know, the smoke is coming out of the roaster. So, but that was where the magic was. And so you asked what it was, that's what it was. It was the way he dealt with dark roast, that he could still roast the coffee dark and find the flavor, and that was it. And,
what
you know, Sal,
what do you think you would think of today's light roast?
Same issue, you know. It's still, he always knew this was for him.
Right.
This was the right roast. I mean, you know, you go to places like Indonesia and they roast dark coffee first thing in the morning to wake up, you know. So there's places in the world, in Europe, where they roast darker, you know, starting with espresso. So anyway, he felt that taste was the best flavor you could get out of a bean and still have the body and the flavor. So that was that was the magic, Dennis.
Wow.
And
he was the magician?
Well, you know, he had it down. I mean, he was so good at tasting. I mean, you know, you'd hear stories about him. I mean, he never told me any of these stories. I heard them later. That when he was, like for example, when he was a tea quality controller for the Dutch East India Company in Sumatra, they had some tea that he was tasting, and he said, "No, this tea is spoiled. It has some oil taste to it." And you know, other people tasted it, and they said, "No, there's nothing wrong with that tea. There's nothing wrong with that tea. Let's send it back to Holland." So they said they wanted to do one more cupping of it. So they did, and then they realized that there was a leak in one of the motors near the tea bags, and the smell of the oil floated over the tea. Now, I mean, there weren't very many people that could taste that. Alfred had that kind of ability. Same thing with coffees. There would be stories about, for example, if you took Colombian coffee from the same area but two different farms, and they mix them together many, many times and sell it just as Columbia coffee, for example. Alfred could separate that. Hey, wait a minute. This batch has got coffee from two different farms in it.
Wow.
That kind of stuff. Yeah.
It's amazing. So, okay, final question, Sal. Well, so after it was sold, what happened with Alfred Pete, and what happened with you? Did you go your separate ways? Did you stay in the industry?
So with me, my wife had been given like 6 months to live. She had cancer, and so we went on, I guess, a spiritual journey, trying to find alternative ways of dealing with the cancer. So we traveled to Mexico, to Switzerland, all over the world, seeing different healers of sorts, and I was on that path. Alfred became more helpful to entrepreneurs that came and asked him for help. So he got a lot of people set him straight in terms of what they need to do to be in the coffee business. And it was wonderful to watch, to see him do that. But, he was always trying to get Americans to learn more about coffee. I mean, one of the things he said to me, that when he came to the United States and he came to San Francisco, he said, how could it be that I'm in one of the richest countries in the world and they drink the lousiest coffee in the world? Right. He just felt like we just didn't have it. But a lot of that had to do with, World War II, and there wasn't coffee. The coffee companies started using worse coffee, and then, at that time, the coffee business was, you could have as many cups of coffee as you want when you were in a restaurant, so the roasters used less quality. So anyway, that's what his feeling was about that.
And then did you stay with coffee after you sold?
Well, after
after your wife sold this,
after
then
my wife passed away, I started getting back into the coffee business a little bit. Now, actually, Alfred and I had talked at that time. This was after the two years, and we thought we would do green coffee. We would be buying those fine coffees and then selling them to the small independent roasters in the United States. But we decided we'd be better off not going back down that road and just stay friends. And so, but I wound up getting involved with different coffee, startups. Like there was like in 1990, I started a company called Wolf Coffee Company up in Santa Rosa with the Mariani family, and then I wound up starting Bonavita Coffee and Tea in Mill Valley, and that was those were all good, but there was. It didn't hold my interest enough. And then I just started doing consulting work and stayed in the coffee business that way.
Well, yours, Sal, is a great story. I'm glad. I mean, we could have a third part. I rarely ever do two parts in an interview, but we had to because there was so much to tell. And I think coffee is absolutely, especially specialty coffee, is so on the upswing now in the United States and most of Europe and all over the world. And you are truly one of the pioneers, one of the people responsible, along with Alfred Pete and a few others. And I think it's good that people know the history and story of coffee and how it's come to us, when I say us, consumers. So thank you so much. It's fascinating, and I'm sure we're going to have many more questions for you. So we'll have to do a third interview at some point. But I really appreciate your time.
Okay, one last thing I need to get in there, though, Dennis.
Absolutely.
that Alfred, there was a sweetness in him. There was a soul part that stood out. He was very philanthropic. And a lot of his activities never really showed up until after he died, about how many people he helped and stuff like that. So even though he appeared like a tyrant to most people, there was a different side. Right. Thank you for letting me tell that story.
Thank you. All the best.
Okay.